The 100% Wild podcast is brought to you by OnX Hunt, the nation's #1 GPS hunting app. Download today in the Google Play and App Store.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Drury Outdoors 100% Wild podcast. I am Tim Chelsvik.
I'm Matt Drury. We got two special Druries with us today, Mark and Terry.
We're at capacity.
Have we ever done this before where he and I are on it?
I don't think
For the
so.
DeerCast.
DeerCast.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Feature.
Okay.
Yeah.
Debut. Yeah.
But not for a normal subject podcast.
I don't think it's
so.
I don't
If
think
this
it's
one
legal.
doesn't hit 2,000 views, I'm going to be real upset.
We're going to come to your house. We're going to find you. We're going to ask you why you're not listening or watching. There you go. Because we're that aggressive.
I have high expectations here.
Well, and we're talking about land on this episode.
The
and
American dream.
how to acquire land. And before we started the show, we were talking about just how spooky it can be to make that purchase. And really the question kind of comes from one of our listeners, and this apologize to Chaz, because this came in back in September of 2018. And
We have so many questions.
we are just
to go
now
through.
and it's hard to get Mark and Terry in the same place at the same time. So I figured they're here now. So why don't we roll into that?
That's right.
So, but before we hop into that, what's new with you guys?
We're doing a lot of routine maintenance stuff right now at the farm, just trying to get ready for deer season. As weird as that sounds, we got turkey season, in the middle here, but we're always, number one, we're putting our best foot forward. We're putting some roofs on different buildings that have blown off, or fixing gates. We're going around the entire parcel, mending fences, and we just started the process yesterday, starting to burn. We got some switch grass that we're burning, so we're doing a lot of the routine maintenance stuff that you let go throughout the season, even equipment. We're working on some of the planters and drills and what have you that, you let that maintenance go too long and then it becomes expensive. So we're trying to keep up.
Sure.
Same, including into that timber stand improvement. We've done a bunch of that this fall as well, or this winter. So it's things are good though. You look at the last season and you go, as you're hunting, I'm sitting there, I make a list in my phone and so I don't forget it. This needs to be addressed. This needs to be addressed. And then at the end of the season, I always go, what could we have done better throughout the season?
Yeah.
And I'm like, we've got to get better at bedrooms and bedroom maintenance and overall switchgrass and food plots. And we're frost seeding clover right now, which I know you are too. So
Which we had frost seeded when we had the snow on up there. We frost seeded a lot of stuff. But
So how do you go about looking at an aerial or just knowing your property and saying, all right, this section is where we need to do a little TSI, or, how do you go about that thought process?
I think when you're sitting there, if you're not seeing a lot of movement during daylight activities repeatedly year in and year out, then all of a sudden it's like, okay, that they're bedding too far away. So we've got to scoot the bed closer. And if you've got cover that you can go in and do TSI on, you can do that. Sure. If you don't, you may have to create the cover via, planting warm season grasses. If you've got the timber, you can thicken that timber up. Timber's easy to thicken up, but you need to do it slowly and cautiously. Like, you don't want to go in there with a chainsaw and go crazy. Have a method to it. Do a little bit this year, a little bit next year, and a little bit year after that, till you finally get them bedding a little bit closer.
And the point with that is get more sunlight to the forest floor. Right?
Absolutely. Yeah. They make their living 5 feet down, So those trees that are all 40 foot tall, they're not doing much good unless they're dropping a nut.
Sure.
We were talking about it yesterday, Matt and I, just briefly, about the timber stand improvements that we have not done, but because of the drought that we had a few years ago, it killed so many big trees that now I got trees laying everywhere. And all of a sudden that understory has started to really, really develop. It's coming on through. So it was kind of Mother Nature's way of doing some TSI, to be quite honest. And the other way of looking at that, if you can't bring the bedroom closer, you can always move the food plot a little closer to the bedroom. So that's another option.
No doubt.
Or you play the moon and you say, well, I'm going to sit a little longer this morning, or I'm going to go in a little sooner in the afternoon. But
absolutely.
But there's different ways of skinning a cat.
No doubt.
What's stuck in my head? It's from the podcast we did a couple episodes ago. Stan Potts screaming triple canopy.
To Stoltz, you remember that? Stan and I climbed up. Steve, it was one of his sets. Yeah.
I think I remember where it's at too. Yeah. I remember exactly where that is.
The question of the day that day was kind of asking us some of our thoughts on the old original, monster buck hunts or whatever the case may be. So we got to go back and live some funny old times.
Fond memories
Talk
with
about
Stanley.
Steve Stoltz a lot.
That one was pretty good though. That was funny.
He was so mad. He climbed down and went looking for Stoltz. Stoltz was
triple canopy. Well, he would throw them up there, but he never would do any trimming.
Ever. I mentioned that. No.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, why don't we get to Chaz's question?
All right. So the question of the day is brought to you by Cabela's Bass Pro. Your adventure starts here.
I'll read the question.
I thought you had audio.
Sorry. So Chaz emailed us and said, I'd love to hear a podcast featuring both Mark and Terry where they walk the audience through their stages of land ownership.
First of all, this production is really slick. I will say that. Here, Mark, you read.
Extremely tight.
Terry and I talked about this, but no.
I feel like I read it in a way that doesn't sound like I'm reading it, though, guys. So that feels like it's
Good
pretty
job.
Yeah, I mean, there you go.
Slick podcast.
It was slick. Well produced.
Okay, I would say that, and I made this comment in the break, and then I'll make this statement, and then we'll break down what I mean by that.
Okay.
I said if Terry and I weren't so conservative and so risk averse, we would own a lot more ground today than we do, but we were scared of debt. And I suspect many of our viewers are in that same position right now if they're listening to this. So you can take it from there, Terry. What finally got you across the fence to make that first purchase?
And to follow that up just a little bit, we're still scared of debt. I mean, it never gets to the point where you feel comfortable with it. That's just the way we were raised, the way we were brought up. You always pay your bills. You don't let too much mount up. So we're still afraid of getting too much debt. With that being said, because I was in the construction industry, which you're well aware of, back in the day, we would buy parcels of property and then invest a substantial sum of money and go in there and develop that property, sell those developed lots. So there was some debt service there that we grew accustomed to, not because we wanted to, but it was part of that nature of that business. So with that, then all of a sudden when you started looking at real estate or started looking at recreational property, it was a little bit different perspective. You weren't looking at it and saying, okay, how much dirt do I have to move? How many streets are we going to put in? How much sanitary sewer, potable water, underground electric, and all those other elements from infrastructure that are so expensive to where you invest a lot of money in a piece of property. It was raw ground. What was I going to have to do to that ground? What were the fences like? What were the creek crossings like? What were the gates like? So you do a little bit of arithmetic in your head, so to speak, and you'd figure out about how much money it'd have to cost you, or you may put into it. And then you go the other route and you say, okay, what kind of assets are listed here? How much timber's on this piece of property? What's the age of that timber? Is it white oak timber? Is it walnut timber? Mm-hmm. Is there any value in this timber? Is it veneer timber or is it pallet grade? And then the next step, you'd say, all right, is there any way I can develop any income from a row crops? Is there soybeans? Is there corn? Is there some leasing available here? Pasture ground? Can I lease some of the pasture rights out? Yeah. And then even to take it one step further, if you were really worried about it, you'd say, well, can I lease out the hunting rights? Maybe one firearm hunt a year, or maybe one archery hunt a year, to try and figure out, if you could service the debt. And if you could get it to where you were kind of neutral on that point, or maybe even a positive fashion, if it had some income on that real estate, mm-hmm. then you were like, hey, this is a no-brainer, provided the interest rate stayed the same. That's the only part that could get you. If you locked it in at let's just use a round number. If you locked it in at 5% and it jumped up to 10, then you were in trouble. But if you locked it in at 5 and the interest went down to 3 or 4, then you were in pretty good shape. You knew we're cash flow neutral or cash flow positive. And that was really what you looked at. You kind of really sliced and diced and you said, I want to try and eliminate as much of the risk as I possibly can. Yeah. So you always look for a little bit of income on a farm and said, you know what, can I afford this? If I can't afford to do it on my own, can I do it with someone else? That was the other option. And I think that's something that a lot of guys overlook. But if you and one other buddy have the same, the same opinion, same concept, same strategy, and same hunting style, there's no reason why you can't two guys go together and look at a piece of property and then take it down.
Imagine a scenario like that. You'd want to have everything in writing. Because I can foresee friendships being torn asunder when there are misunderstandings.
Yeah, and all of a sudden maybe one guy's wanting to take his, family member or a friend, and you're like, oh, wait a second, So yeah, I think you'd have to have a lot of understanding taking a partner on in that regard,
or just let your wives negotiate it.
Yeah. So you hear the phrase cash flow positive a lot when you hear people talk about buying a farm, and you're alluding to those things, right? Like the way you guys look at a farm and break it down, share a little bit more.
There's so many savvy buyers out there right now, and there's so many savvy agents that really the market that boat left, right?
Yeah.
You might get to neutral, but I don't think you're going to get to positive. That's a tough one to find. In other words, if the interest rate is 5%, borrowing Terry's number, and you buy a farm that's $100,000, you need at least $5,000 worth of income on it just to pay the interest per year if you borrow the entire amount. That's very hard to find one that's actually going to make you a little bit money. It might be out there, but I find most of the good recreational farms, because you still, if deer hunting is your ultimate purpose, you're still going to find farms out there that not all of it is usable for agricultural purposes.
Sure, yeah.
The timber might come into play where there's some, timber value out there. But most farms, if you find one that's listed at 3 points right now, that's a pretty good return on a recreational farm based on the markets that I look at. The first meeting I think you should have, the first meeting you should have is with your spouse or your significant other. The second meeting, you need to go to a banker and go, here's what I want to do. Here's my current amount of income. Here's my current amount of debt. Can I even afford to do this?
Yeah.
Or what level can I afford to go out there? Then maybe seek partners out, or perhaps just seek to be a minority interest in a piece. Maybe you find the right partner where it's not as much economic input that you give. Perhaps it's the labor side of it. You might be able to say, I can't afford to buy 50% of this farm, but I can afford to pay you 10% of the overall cost, and I can put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears that you may not want to give that I'll put in there and make sure this farm eventually retains its overall value or expands on that value.
That's an interesting point, because that when Dad and I a couple of years ago looked at purchasing a piece together, and I was in this very same scenario when I went to look at my finances and my debt and go to my banker and say, all right, what could I get? What can I get for a loan? I really had no idea. And when it all boiled down to it, it's like, all right, I'm not going to be a 50-50 split here. The reality is I could put in 10%. For me, it was all I could do, but it was a start. And we had Dan Perez on a long time ago on the podcast. And he had said, I think, the first piece of property might've been like 6 acres and then 40 acres. And then, he worked his way into buying bigger and bigger pieces, but he said the same thing. You have to start somewhere. So the way I kept looking at it and still look at it is that if I can take the 10% and ultimately be able to at one day take on my own farm, maybe it's 50 acres or 60 acres or 100 or whatever it is, on my own, fully on my own, because we have been able to buy and sell a couple pieces and I was a 10% owner of, this LLC. The end goal is down the road, it might be 30 years from now, but
get rid of him.
I might be able to get rid of that. And he's probably thinking, I wish it was more like 2 years from now. I'd be able to get rid of you.
So. The end goal here is,
I was wondering when his minority interest would convert into labor.
Hey,
I'm still waiting on that part.
The one farm.
Maybe when the kids get old enough, send them up there.
Well, and so that we don't get ahead of ourselves, those smaller tracks are how we started.
Absolutely.
We really did, and everything is relative. The prices back then we thought were prohibitive. I mean, we really looked at them and said, man, oh man, this farm is outrageous. But they were smaller tracks. We took them down. We borrowed the money, went to the bank, borrowed the money, and literally put every dime that we earned into those pieces, turned around and sold them, and then bought a little bit bigger piece the next time. And that's really what it's all about. Danny's absolutely correct, and nobody knows it better than Dan Perez. But he's seen it, and he has seen it evolve. But that's kind of how we all got our start, and Dan included way back in the day. We bought those little bitty chunks, small pieces, something. And even then we couldn't really afford it, but every single dime that we made went into that farm. We didn't have all the extracurricular stuff that other people had.
We didn't.
Sure. We just put it in.
No boats, no cycles, lived in modest homes. In reality,
no cabins,
nothing.
All went into
dirt. We
had
our home, and every single cent I had went into dirt. And then some.
Yes.
Every single thing, because our passion was so burning so brightly. Like we had to own dirt. Like we just, we couldn't get enough of it, because back then we were like, find a better spot, make your spot better. And we'd hop from state to state to state and outfitter to outfitter to outfitter. And we just weren't pleased with what we were seeing in terms of the quality we wanted to raise. And then we started going to Texas a little bit, and we were like, these guys get it down here. They're allowing deer get to the age of 5.5, 6.5 years old. We're like, we need to do that in the Midwest. How do you do that? You control it yourself. So that really led us down the path of owning it and controlling it.
I was going to say, before that, you were leasing too.
We were.
And then people.
But even then, you don't have control of it. If they want to put cattle in there, they put cattle in there. If they want corn 3 years in a row, they put corn 3 years in a row. There's no substitution for having control of it if you really want to maximize the resource within it. But with that comes a lot of sacrifices. You got to be willing to sacrifice to get to the point where you have control and say so over the ground.
There were a lot of months where we weren't sure how we were going to make that payment. I mean, it was pull and tug and scratch and claw for every penny and every dime that went in there. And then you get to the next month and then the following month. And all of a sudden you had some equity built up. And then if you did decide to flip it, at least it rolled into a little bit more equity for the next piece. But it's about starting small. And nobody knows it again better than Dan Perez.
What were some of the, if you guys can recall, the sizes of the early parcels that you picked up?
I had a 53 acre piece. It was one of our better farms over there in Pike.
Killed that. Deer, and then I killed out of the same tree stand
10 days later.
That was my first deer ever.
That was in 86, I think.
No, it would have been 96.
96? Okay.
Yeah, when I killed my first deer ever, it was 96.
True. So it was a piece at that time. We thought we paid too much for it when we bought it. It was one of those pieces over in Pike County.
No matter when you buy, you always feel like you're paying a lot. Sure. I can't remember a piece where I went, boy, I got a great deal on that one, because that's the way the market is. But the market continues to go up and up and up. I mean, they're not making any more of it, So I think regardless of when you stepped into buying your first piece, whether it was, the mid to early 90s or mid to late 90s, or if it's today, Terry mentioned before the podcast, it's relative, right? Mm-hmm. Where's it going to be in 10 years, 20 years? Well, I'm very bullish on it. I think it's going to continue to go up.
Now, one of the pitfalls I would think is if there's a piece of ground, it might look like the best thing ever. It's the piece you want, but if it's been bought and sold like 2-3 times within a few years, it's probably maxed out for now, right?
Maybe you learn that by looking at the comps in the neighborhood, and you learn that by talking to every realtor that's selling dirt. I would call the rep at Mossy Oak Properties. I'd call Whitetail Properties, Land Pros, Dream Dirt. I would call them all and just educate yourself. Ask about certain pieces. Ask about comps in the area. Ask them where they think the market's going. And if that area doesn't suit your needs, perhaps you need to look at a different state, believe it or not, because if the long-term goal is to own close to where you live, which I would assume most people that would be the goal. Well, if the market doesn't fit you now, perhaps there's an emerging market out there somewhere that you can buy at a lower price, build it up, and eventually sell it to create the money that you need to afford the land close to where you're at. Because if you're sitting in Pike County, Illinois right now, and you're trying to buy your first 80, that's a tough task. Yeah. However, you go to Kentucky or Oklahoma or Kansas, there's some other dirt out there that's a third or a fourth of the price of that, where you could possibly start that snowball and get it rolling and eventually build up to where you could afford ground closer to where you live.
So what kind of down payments percentage-wise are you looking at when you buy a recreational piece of property?
It depends on your credit a little bit.
And it's not too indifferent from purchasing a home. Yeah. They're looking at 20% down.
Yeah.
And really, if you can't secure that 20% down, you may or may not have any business buying a piece because you might not be able to afford it. So it may take 5 or 10 years to acquire 20% down payment. The other option is to take on that buddy, that equity partner. And there are those guys out there. The stock market is so volatile, which we've seen in the last several days, how volatile a market can be. There are those guys out there that actually have money and have cash that are willing to put it into real estate.
Who are they?
And
I'm not going to tell you.
A list of names and addresses and numbers.
Please.
They may want to pull it out of the market while we're at a high and move it somewhere else.
Yeah,
I personally think there's a big push coming in land here, depending on the election this fall. But I think if we see President Trump get reelected, I think you're in for a good little ride here with land coming up. That's my personal thought.
So, but there are those guys out there, meaning if you can't take it down and you don't have the 20%, you can't afford the monthly payments, by all means, get the ball rolling and try and look for another partner. Yeah. 2 guys are much stronger than one,
Someone that sucks at hunting, can't shoot straight, has no discretionary time.
That's him, yeah.
That would be the partner, the ideal partner.
That's the guy.
Yeah, find somebody that's a workaholic.
For some reason, he wants you to be his partner.
Yeah, I mean, just the cachet of it. I got Tim Chelswick partnering with me on this property.
He is so likable. And he has his podcast.
We do.
That sounded kind of negative the way he said
It
that.
really, yeah. I mean, most of it was. I think that's how it was intended.
Not intended. Not intended.
Well, so my buddy just picked up 40 acres, and he had some a timber stand evaluation done, and turns out he's got about 10K worth.
Right
of
on.
There you
That's
go.
a lot
property.
for 40 acres.
Yeah, that is a lot.
And so like it begged the question to me, how much does a timber stand evaluation cost? Like what is the initial cost to start reaping some of that value that's there in the property?
Well, the evaluation wouldn't cost that much. It's the actual cut where you did that logging industry. Now I can just tell you, you've got to make sure you interview a lot of loggers and a lot of references for those loggers. If there's one profession that doesn't have the best of reputation, it's the logging industry. I've come to find some great ones and have great relationships with them, and I trust them, but I still get assessments and evaluations before they ever do a cut for me. And then we count the logs and measure the logs. And
You have to be that involved.
absolutely.
Oh yeah,
Wow.
100%.
Absolutely.
And the state provides services like that too with the foresters. You know,
Absolutely.
that you
but
can.
why wouldn't you? It's your crop.
Oh,
if you're going to cut corn, you know exactly how many bushels you sell.
And it's not like
why
you're
not
going to do it the next year.
Right.
Cut once.
Why not know how many board feet are leaving your farm? You know, that's what I would advise, because it's one of those things people are like, I don't know. And loggers come in, they'll give you a bid for about a third of what it's worth, you know, but if you keep them honest, then and Ben Rising's who taught me this stuff, because Ben's a logger from out in Ohio, and he was like, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this, do all of these things. And he really did help refine it. He'd be a great guest just on logging.
We did have him on once and talked a lot about that. We got into that discussion. It was probably one of my favorite podcasts because he was a wealth of information.
Yeah, he is. He knows that game inside and out.
Well, and even calculating board feet, there's a lot of guys that don't know how to do that, and there's a science to it. You know, and some loggers won't take trees under 21 or 22 inches, so you may have a crop there where you kind of leave a few of them the first year, and maybe 2 or 3, 5 years down the road, you may go in there and hit it again. But you kind of got to watch that on the front end to say, here's where I want to make my roads. Here's the part we're going to have as a graveyard or a boneyard where we're going to load them out. There's a lot to it once you start tearing up the timber. And some of them are really good at it. I mean, I've seen some of them that are absolutely off the charts when it comes to professionalism.
Yeah.
Big time.
But you got to stay on top of it.
There's a group in Northeast Missouri that's making a name for themselves. They're called whitetail loggers, and they're going in specifically to these whitetail farms. They recognize the market, and they're going in and placing brush piles where you want them and creating funnels and all that stuff. And they really do get it and do a really nice job. John Zedner does a super good job for me as well. But both of those guys are very, very good, reputable companies.
Interesting.
It was exciting to me to hear that you could realize maybe $10,000 worth of value off a property, depending on what you have in terms of timber.
Oh yeah, and timber, sure, yeah, absolutely.
And the other way to look at that is to say, you know what, if I get in trouble financially, I've got 10 grand sitting here that I could turn it into money if I had to.
Sure.
That's the other way to look at it. Meaning if you wanted to hang on to it, or you could, depending on the maturity of the timber, you know, to where you go in there and you harvest a few, but you leave a few for down the road. And you say, you know what, if I have trouble making a payment one year or for 6 months, then I've got something to fall back on.
Yeah.
Just don't let them cut too small a tree. They'll want to cut you down to 17 inches while they're in there. They want to take what they can. Ben always said, don't let them go below 21 inches. Take 21 and above, and then you're going to have another cut in 10 years or so. He's hell bent on that. Nothing below 21.
And 40 acres, you know, that seems like that would be a lot of cutting for $10,000 in profit, right?
It depends how much walnut's in there.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've got an 80 in North Missouri right now with a pile of big straight walnuts, and there's a pile of value there. I didn't know it. Like, I knew they were there, but I didn't know what the value was. The walnut value is really high right now.
And that's something to look at. You know, if a guy is looking at buying a piece, is try and do some type of assessment on that timber stand. Yeah.
Just don't educate the seller. They may not know.
I mean, because when I figured this out, I was like, why doesn't everyone just timber if they got money standing?
It's one
there.
of those unknown industries, you know, because it's not overly developed. There's just a few loggers in each region, you know, and not a lot of people get that timber still.
Well, and I've always been resistant about going in there. That's one of the things we never want to do is go into the timber. I mean, ours are like sacred ground. We just don't even walk through there unless we absolutely have to. So going in there and doing that major disruption is against everything we ever stood for. So, I mean, you got to get it in your head and say, all right, I'm going to let somebody go in there there and do this, and hopefully it'll come back, and reap rewards later on.
The goal would be to have it complete by like June or so. You know,
Yes.
you want to do your cut in the winter or in early spring
Sure.
and get them out of there. You know,
Yeah,
but the challenge there is it's always muddy and wet, so it's hard to find that dry period.
Tearing it
Tearing it
everything
up.
Yeah.
So speaking of timing, when is there a best time of year to start looking at properties if a person is interested?
I can tell you that the market peaks during the first quarter and slightly into the second every year. Every realtor you talk to, February through about May, they are just gangbusters. And the market heats up a little bit every time because season ended and everybody's like, I got to switch this out before next season.
Yeah.
The slow time to actually get a realtor's attention, look at a lot of different farms, is either heat of the summer or sometime during the fall because everybody's already out hunting. But those are the times where they are the slowest and you'll get the most opportunity to visit with them.
And typically right now, when you walk through a piece of timber, you can see an awful lot in a short period of time. But if you wait till midsummer, you really can't see much.
Yeah.
But now you can get a pretty good eyeball on what kind of timber you've got on a piece.
Well, and what kind of, deer sign you have, the tracks
Yes.
and rubs and all that
Yeah.
stuff. I mean, it's just like, when you shed hunt, you find so many different things on your property you didn't know may have been there.
Right.
Well, it's the same when you're looking at a piece of property. Now's a good time to do that. All the agents will tell you that, like, hey, if you're going to list it, let's do it before it greens up.
Sure. I've had, I think, 4 buddies go into the whitetail property real estate business in the past 2 years. And I'm concerned for them because it seems like, boy, if everyone's hopping on this bandwagon,
Gravy train.
A lot of realtors out there right now.
Yeah. So how do you pick someone that is going to shoot you square and advocate for your best interests?
I'd say reputation. They don't stick around very long if they are not above board and doing things the right way. So ask around, online, local coffee shop, talk to people, see who's doing the best job out there. But one thing's for sure, if they're with mossy oak properties or whitetail properties, these reputable groups, chances are you're going to be talking to somebody that's pretty knowledgeable.
Okay.
Yeah, networking is always good. If you know somebody that went through the experience or has worked with them on numerous occasions, then it's always good to pick up the phone and call them.
No doubt.
Because kind of this person is responsible for part of your family's your family's fortune and what you may be leaving your kids, and it's such a huge decision, and you don't want someone that's just wanting you to sign on the dotted line and move on to the next project.
That's for sure, because it is a big investment. And no matter how small or how big the piece is, it's going to be expensive.
And it was big back then,
Yeah.
I kind of looked at it as, and Tracy always argued with me on this, but I looked at it as our retirement. I kept saying, someday this is going to be, and I didn't have much money in the stock market. Still don't, man. I invest in land. I mean, that's what I believe in. Might bite me someday, but up to this point, it's been a blessing.
Well, we talked about spouses earlier. That's the hardest sale right there, is convincing them that that's the correct thing to do, because there's so many other things that are needed and necessary when you have children, you have family, you got college, you got cars, you got all this other stuff that's expensive. It's really hard to convince your spouse that, hey, this is the best thing since sliced bread.
You're spending what on what? Like, trust me, that's why I always say, like, looking at our retirement, but that's hard to think that far down the line for, not everybody has that kind of foresight because of the bills and the problems you may have right now. It's like, hey, why don't we pay off our house first? Or why don't we there's a billion other things, the car payment or whatever. It's like, no, this is something that's not going away. And you might be able to double your investment down the road.
And that's the point. Tell them about the vision you see 20 years down the road, not the cost of it today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
For sure.
I do believe that those guys that are working week to week, the blue collar guy that just barely can make ends meet now, finding that, becoming a silent partner or that you call it the smaller level, that 10% partner, and finding that guy that might be interested, or 2 or 3 other guys that could take down a parcel of property. That's the key. And starting today is the answer. It's not waiting till tomorrow till land continues to escalate. It's starting today, because the the prices are always relative and they're going to continue to go up. I think historically it's about a 6% net on real estate. Always has been, probably always will be, but it's still relative to what everyone's earning, what everyone's making. I do believe the interest rates today are much lower than they were back when we were borrowing money back in the day.
Gracious, yes. I don't know what the interest rate, I don't recall what they were. They were like, they were over 5. I know that, like 6, 7, I would think.
Yes, there was a lot of it. We were at 7. I'm not so sure. Some of it didn't creep up to 10.
Yeah.
But at anywhere from 3 to 5 now, it's pretty good interest rate.
Yeah.
The investment factors are pretty strong. Is a pretty strong reason to get in on this. Like, yeah, there's a current benefit for hunting and developing something into something that's gonna benefit you short term, but also long term. That's
one thing that I've noticed, and I think it's almost an inverse relationship to the stock market, because when the stock market was going down back like 06 through 09, back in there when we had that big crash, there was a bunch of money pouring into real estate, because people were pulling it out of the stock market, put it in there. This ride that we've been on since, when was it? 17. I've noticed the market has slowed down just a touch, the land market, just a bit in certain areas where it's actually softened a little bit. Prices have stabilized. They haven't continued to increase. And I just wonder if more people have a little more confidence, they're a little bullish on this market. If it starts to go down, it will be interesting to see if the land values start to go up again, because they sure went on a ride when the stock market was in the worst of shape. Then the land prices were increasing at a dramatic pace.
I think that's a real phenomenon, because gold and silver kind of follow the same track.
Yeah.
It's something tangible that you can
you can go walk on it.
Yeah. Unlike the big Beanie Baby investment I made, that did not end well at all.
And even tillable, that farming property, farmland is really, really tied to the market and futures and all those things when it comes to the tariffs and what's going on there, and Mother Nature, how she treats the farmers each and every year. So you really got to be cognizant of what they're doing as well.
So Farm Bill plays into it as well.
When
CRP
it comes to
signups, that type of stuff.
CRP signups, sure.
Maybe explain that a little bit, because if you're looking at buying a piece of property and it's got tillable on it, is there a farmer that comes along with the property that was leasing the ground prior? Or how do you even establish that relationship?
Perhaps. Sometimes there is, sometimes there isn't. You really should do your due diligence there and make sure there's either one in place or one or two that you could visit with that have an interest in it, and make sure you define how high their interest level is. In other words, if it's currently renting at $150 an acre, is he willing to do that for 2 to 3 years, or does he see it dropping, or is there someone standing there going, yeah, I would also do that 150. You got to make sure you do your due diligence on the income potential, because there's farmers in some areas that have been treated a little roughly here of late. It's been a little bit tougher to find good paying tenants than it used to be.
And I think a lot of times the listing agent will ask the original owner to find, like, hey, do you have some farmers you recommend, or, some prices that you could say, that they could take to a potential buyer and say, yeah, here's a list of farmers in this area that you might be able to go to.
The good agents will have that for you.
Yeah.
The good ones will.
Yeah. Because most people don't have a Rolodex full of farmers.
If you're buying
or know what a Rolodex is.
3 hours away, you may not know a single soul.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Right. Where do you even start?
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, and conversely, you want to check on CRP signups and what can be enrolled and what can't be enrolled, what is enrolled, and then the duration, how long it's in. So there's a lot of programs out there that you really want to do that due diligence that he was talking about to make sure.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
To make sure that you know what type of income you can generate off of this particular parcel.
And we use that acronym a lot. And maybe someone that's newer to deer hunting or even land management may not know what CRP stands for, because we talk about CRP grass and
Conservation Reserve Program.
And that's administered by what agency?
FSA.
And that is
NRCS. Farm Service Agency, Natural Resource Conservation Service, NRCS. I'm not sure exactly what that acronym is. Something like that.
My understanding is it's a program to
set aside.
To set aside natural habitat for animals, and
it is, but it's advanced well beyond that now. Now there's stuff out there for pollinators, there's stuff out there for butterflies, there's stuff out there, tree programs. So you really need to. There's an FSA office. If it's not in every county, it's in every other county. Go in there and you'll get an education like you can't believe on what programs are available. But there's a lot of stuff available right now.
It kind of seems like a win-win if you're keeping this piece of ground off an agricultural routine and it's in CRP. I imagine that has a positive impact on whitetail habitat, and so you're getting paid for.
You're getting paid, but they also have the legal right to tell you what to do with that ground at that point. Then, so like when it comes to mid-contract maintenance and keeping it clean, and so it's not just a check. There's a liability there that you take on whenever you sign that contract. Okay. It's yours to make sure that you keep it up to date. So read the fine print and know what you're getting into. If there's a current CRP program in place, make sure you understand your responsibilities when you buy that piece of property.
Perfect.
And so many of those programs were really set up because the land was highly erodible, and they were designated as to try and stop that erosion. So they didn't want them continually turning the soil each and every year. So they said, all right, we need to plant some cover crop on this and stop that erosion. That was kind of why it was set up many, many years ago, I do believe.
Yeah,
sure.
And that was all like Great Depression stuff, right? Those are programs.
I think some of it went all the way back to the old Dust Bowl days.
But that's what I'm saying. Yeah. That's where it came out of, or the genesis of it. Came out of those Dust Bowl age. And
I think that initial CRP stuff though started occurring back in the 90s, did it not? I'm trying to think when I bought my first farm, because it had been in about 10. I think it started in the 80s to the 90s, if I'm not mistaken, because some of that stuff was in the original set-aside stuff. And I think that's when it originated, at least there in Iowa, if I'm not mistaken.
A farmer could probably tell us a lot.
Back there to the Farm Bill, and you could probably research it and Google it and find out where it got its roots,
There's probably people listening right now that are just like, it was 1984.
I'm sure they know. But I thought I bought in 97 and it had been in for 10 years. So I feel like it's sometimes started in the 80s, at least that farmer. I thought that was some of the original set-aside stuff, if I'm not mistaken. But that doesn't mean it wasn't different in other states.
It looks like 1985 was Mark.
There you go.
The genesis as to what we
the Farm Bill.
Matt, let's cut out the part where I said Great Depression era.
He's going to leave it in now. And then Matt Drury, the idiot.
I don't.
It started in 1776.
Field a bunch of emails over that.
Oh God! Any parting words of wisdom for someone looking, because you guys have been there and done that? Any words of wisdom in addition to what you've already given us on land?
I just would like to reiterate: it's about starting small and not trying to, overspend your means, making sure that you can afford it. And if you can't afford it, look outside of that, try and find a partner that's got the same strategy, game plan, passion that you do, and doing your homework, doing that due diligence, boy, making sure that you leave no stone unturned when it comes to, those liabilities that we were talking about, or what type of income you can generate. So there's a whole list of things you can do, but and then going to a bank and finding out what the interest rates are, and then finding out how long you can lock it in and whether or not you can get the loan. So there's really a bevy of things that you have to do on the to-do list.
I find that talking to people that have done it and have done it for a long time, that helps as much as anything, because it's like, you just don't know, you don't know. So even going to a local branch, a local bank, they might not understand if you live in, like here in the suburbs of St. Louis, it's like, all right, you want to do what? It's for what exactly? They may not understand what you're trying to, it's recreational ground, that it's far hunting and it's investment.
What they're going to be interested in is the appraised value of the piece you're talking about. So walk in there with an appraised value and go, here's what it's worth.
Sure.
Yeah.
Because they do recognize appraisals, whether it be in the housing industry or in land, they'll recognize that. And then they can at least go, oh, it is valued correctly, or you're getting a decent deal here. So therefore they might be able to borrow you a little bit more. If by chance its appraised value is a little bit more than what the list value is, then all of a sudden your 20% that you're bringing in to list is worth about 30% per appraised. So make sure you have an appraisal that goes with it.
Yeah. So if you think purchasing a car or purchasing a house is, you put a lot of thought and effort into that decision, it's that times 10, it feels like.
Very similar to purchasing a home in all reality.
Yeah, true.
When you start talking about the dollar amount, depending on how big you start, but if you're at 40 acres, 50 acres, and then you jump up to 80 and so on, just keep stair-stepping, each time trying to make an advancement.
There is an article in DeerCast that pretty much says, hey, you scaffold your way into bigger pieces of property, and it makes a lot of sense. It makes it less daunting.
That article was quite a while back, wasn't it?
It was,
if I remember
yeah,
right.
yeah.
Yeah, we might run that one again. That was a really
Did Ryan
good, really
write
good
that
piece.
one?
Jeremy Kerber.
Jeremy.
Yeah, it was a
okay.
good piece.
Right. Yeah.
It was a good piece.
It's a snowball. That's the way I always look at it. Start here and let it grow. Let it grow.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Steve Stoltz of all people is calling me
He'll
right
do
now.
anything to be a
Great
guest on the
timing,
podcast.
I knew I should have put that on Do Not Disturb.
Is this live? Did
He's
you
just
hear the
looking to
comment
be a
about the
minority, minority
canopy?
investor.
Right.
He's got us bugged.
I'll hang the stands.
Triple canopy labor. Triple canopy.
Classic.
Let's hop into the wildlife word, shall we?
All right,
Let's do it.
This week's wildlife word is dark muscle. Sounds eerie and foreboding, doesn't it? Terry's patting his bicep.
Terry, mid-August, fully tanned.
He didn't say what muscle. He said dark muscle.
Fully tan at the lake on his dock, mid-August.
Like a
dark muscle.
bronze Adonis.
Bush light in hand.
That's right.
Mick Ultra.
Do you tan or do you just get red?
I don't tan. I really don't. And there's reason behind that. Number one, because Willa just went through some surgery not too long ago with some cancer cells that we got rid of. But it's ugly. You don't want to expose yourself any more than you have to. And we're outside. We're outside. Year round. I mean, we're rarely not outside.
Yeah.
So I'm just very careful about it.
Sure.
The sun.
Rarely not inside.
Right, we're pasty just because we are. So dark muscle are the muscle fibers that are full of fat and myoglobin for sustained use, like a turkey's legs. The drumsticks are dark muscle or dark meat because they're used all the time. It's a type of muscle.
Makes sense.
tissue.
They are dark. They're also full of tendons.
Yeah.
I would have called it tendon muscle.
Yeah, almost
Man,
impossible to eat.
It's incredible. Well, you got to debone it or boil it down.
That's
one
what
of the two.
our Aunt Ethelyn, Uncle Marvin's wife, Aunt Ethelyn, she used to always boil it down and then make turkey salad out of it. We lived off of it, boy.
You cook them down.
Yeah.
Remember this?
Cook 'em down.
I've crack potted them and then stripped the meat off and then eat. I mean, it's just a bunch of scraps. But
Yeah. We clean it and we debone them when we clean the turkey because we grind all our turkeys, and that dark muscle really makes the breast overall much more moist and much more palatable.
Yeah.
It's amazing how much better ground is when you include the thighs and the legs into that breast.
He just gave me a bunch of ground turkey meat that we used in chili the other day. It was so good, man.
You can't tell it from. I find it some of the most pleasing ground meat I've
It's
ever
good.
eaten. Yeah,
It is good.
it's good.
I've never heard anyone say the words pleasing ground meat before.
I love it.
I like that. I find wild turkey to be more flavorful than like the butterball that you'd buy
Oh, absolutely.
at the store.
It is.
Especially when you deep fry it, beer batter it.
Well, it's funny because there's just no there's no gaminess to a wild turkey because people will complain about gaminess. To
Somewhat
venison.
bland. A store-bought is bland.
Oh, yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
in
Compared to
comparison to
wild
wild.
turkey.
Wild turkey.
100%
Yep.
agree. Yeah.
Yep.
So there's wildlife word,
There you go.
Beautiful. All right.
which means we can end the show because people have been fully satisfied.
Yeah.
And no doubt
you're
waiting
welcome.
on the wildlife.
Yes. Most people.
That's why we put it at the end. People stick around.
Just stick around.
We don't want to lose them right out of the gate.
Terry's biting his tongue right now. It's going to be nice.
If he had a thought, he'd tell you.
No doubt. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in. Thank you, Chaz, for the question. If you want to leave a question, go to DruryOutdoors.com/podcast, click the send voicemail tab, leave your name, location, and what burning question you have you'd like us to answer on the air.
All right.
Thanks
Until
so much.
next time.
Thank you.
Peace
ya.
out. Good luck buying that piece of ground. We're adding new videos every week, so make sure to click that subscribe button and check out all of our amazing content. This episode of DoD TV is brought to you by OnX Hunt, the nation's #1 GPS hunting app.